Good morning. Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're close to the bottom of page 1317, Aleph Shin Yud Zayin. And we've now entered Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis B'Hamtakas Gevurah is the second method or the second manner in which the severities of Gevurah are sweetened. And now he says that the Gevurahs themselves get sweetened. Not an outside force, like he says, not that the cause for this change from bitter to sweet comes through something else, through another entity that sweetens it. Namely, like in the first way, first Eifin, the sweet waters or the sweetness of Chesadim, like the bitter waters that are sweetened by the abundance that overrides that bitterness and sweetens them. This very entity itself that is sweet, that is bitter, is transformed to sweetness. So something in the Gevurah itself is being transformed from Gevurah to Chesed, or from bitter to sweet. And he gives the example of the blood that curdles and turns into the Cholov. Dam is Gevurah, Cholov is Chesed. And there you see, it's not that the Dam itself, which is Gevurah, becomes a milk. Now, Dam, for example, is you're forbidden to eat, but milk is you're allowed to eat. So there clearly you see there's a transformation. It's not one thing overwhelming or overriding another. It's the actual transformation. And then he began to explain it, and he said, this is the transformation of the prosecutor to be the defense. And that's mitzad ha'oris pnei melech nepach ha'katega v'nasa l'sanega. So even though, so to speak, in the regular Seder Shtalshalus, Chesed would be here and Gevurah would be here, like we learned in the previous paragraph. Then Seder Shtalshalus, Chesed and Gevurah, and then there's a dominance of Chesed over Gevurah in Zah, and the same thing as it affects Malchus. But there, it's all coming from a force that's not the Gevurah itself. It's the Chesed impacting it. Or when he spoke about Malchus in the previous paragraph, its thirst and its rotzei, its yearning, is quenched through the hamshach of mad of Zah, but it's again an outside force. Now we're talking about it itself, Gam Eviv Yashlim Imei, that also his enemies, Yashlim Imei, will support him, will become his allies, the prosecutor becoming the defense. And that's where we stopped. We stopped by a Kamoy Kain Ba'aveda. Now we're going to continue and learn the contrast to what we learned in the previous paragraph. Remember, in Aveda, we learned that Tzaddik Sheine Gomer, what does he do? Even a Tzaddik. So by him, ultimately it's a form of, it's still being impacted, the Gevurah, or the what he called the Gevurah of the Gevurah of the animal soul. Even though it doesn't have any dominance, he's completely controlled the animal soul, but something remains that's bottled, the Ra, Tzaddik V'Raloi, something remains and it's sublimated and nullified in the presence of all this goodness. So even when he has a negative thought, not on his own, but it falls in inadvertently, he knows how to diffuse it because he brings in the Av of the Nefesh HaLekis. But the Tzaddik Gomer, we learned clearly, doesn't have any of that. So now in Aveda, he's going to explain where do we see in Aveda this idea that the Gevurah itself is being transformed, not just another force is dominating over it. So he says like this: the Kamoy came by Aveda, and so too in Aveda, who shara be'etzem husay nepach l'tev. That the Ra be'etzem husay, its very personality has been transformed to good. Ukinyam moyes bara ukamay sonei Ra. Like we learned before from Tanya chapter Yud, chapter 10, that when he said in the beginning of the paragraph on the previous page, he says that when you talk about a Tzaddik Gomer, there's a completely no relationship at all. But in his case, the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Abamis, is completely no relationship with him. He's transformed it to the point that he completely despises it utterly. Now, Tzaddik She'eino Gom, it doesn't mean he doesn't despise Ra. He says that there as well. But because he's not fully transformed it, there is something that still holds on to some drop. Now, where does it express itself? Only in the battle that he has. Like he said, that he lets himself be exposed in order to vanquish it. In the Beinoni, it expresses itself, there's a full battle all the time, 24/7. The Nefesh Abamis wants one thing, the Nefesh Elokis wants another. And then the Beinoni has enough self-control to control that the animal soul doesn't have any practical application or practical control, meaning in thought, speech, and action. But there are two forces at work. It's a battle. By the Tzaddik She'eino Gomer, the battle is over. But since we still live in a world where there's something there's negativity, the Tzaddik She'eino Gomer deals with it. It's still in a form, not as he said, a full battle, but he exposes himself, allows himself to be exposed, to deal with it. The Tzaddik Gomer, on the other hand, is completely vanquished it. It's like a taste of L'ased Love, where there is no more evil. All the evil has been transformed, like he says, Be'etzem Hussein Nepech Latev. Like the Inyan of Moyes Bara, someone that completely despises Ra, and it brings the pasuk Sanei Ra, that he hates and despises evil. Not just in the form of iskafia. Remember, iskafia is kaifa, meaning that he's imposing himself on it. Iskafia means you're refraining, you're controlling. Not just iskafia. That's only a weakening, like we learned in the previous page, in the earlier paragraph on page 13, 16. That's only chlishus. Shanasa de dover hamenagid canal. That is caused through the dover hamenagid. So the fact is that you're weak. Shanasa de dover hamenagid, does he mean that the chalishus? Now, first I thought he meant to say that is the menagid, there's an enemy here, and the nefesh elikiz has the power to weaken it. That's called iskafia. He said the nechlash keichem eid, misr gvuras kedusha b'chadim de kedusha. But now I'm thinking maybe alidei dover menagid also means that it weakens the nefesh elikiz. The chasadim are also not in their full intensity. I don't think that's what he means here. That's only weakening. Okay, you have to say it's that through the dover hamenagid, when he means shanasa, not that the weakening happens through the enemy, that the enemy causes a challenge, that in turn the positive side weakens it. That's what I think he means here, because shanasa usually means that the menagid is causing it. So that would sound more like he's causing a weakening in the oir. Like we said, even the bitter water may be minimal, but it somewhat weakens the sweetness. I don't think that's what he means. So this is the third time he used this expression, that the bittul is only the ispashtus, like he said earlier on top of the page, when he spoke about on top of the page, and also on page 13, 15, where he spoke about, just want to find the exact language. Yeah, the hispashtus, which means it doesn't affect the etzim, only the extension of the animal soul. I want to find the exact, right here, on top of page 13, 15, he said, Ein ze bittul be'etzim husikim chins hispashtus shalei. Okay, which is the avoid of the Beinoni. He said it also at the parentheses on the beginning of the paragraph on page 13, 16. And now he repeats it again, that it's only an effect on the ispashtus bavad. When it comes to iskafia, this lower level, the etzem mahuz, the actual personality was not transformed at all. So it was subdued, tamed, nullified, quieted. All these words fit. But to say transformed, no, the etzem mahus was not affected. And what was affected was only its extension, only its expression. Now, this is more like the Beinani. The tzaddik sheina gomer, it affects the etzem mahuseh. He said that clearly. The bittul be'etzem was the nefesh habamis by the tzaddik, even the tzaddik sheina gomer. However, there's still something that is, there's some mixed as the mix, like he says, bedakus, there's some subtle thing that still remains. But when he says here, Pashtus, here he's for sure talking iskafi, is not the tzaddik sheina gomer, it's the Beinani. So it's not be'etzem ulei nepachlam, mashenkin inyan moiz bara. But moiz bara, which is complete by tzaddik gomer, complete despising ra. Despising ra doesn't just mean that you subdue it. It doesn't just mean you nullify it. It doesn't just mean that the good overrides it. Hu shemoyez be'ikar ra, that he despises and is repulsed by the ra itself, by the ikar ra. Ikar ra means, most likely here, ikar can mean the primary part of the ra, but ikar ra means that the very ra, the very fact that there's something that is against godliness, is for him completely repulsive and despicable. Umavayre legamri, and completely eliminates it, completely annihilates it. Mavayre from the word like bir chametz, we have to completely destroy it. Completely burns it out. Mavayre legamri, mekol v'kol, unequivocally, absolutely and completely. V'hu, but it goes a step further. It doesn't just completely eliminate it. V'hu misapich be'etzem mahuseh l'teiv. And whatever remains from it, what was there, is completely now been transformed to goodness. So when we say b'shnei yitzerech, b'chol avavcha b'shnei yitzerecha, so on a Beinani level, it means a machshava dibra ma'aser, that the thought, speech, and action of the animal soul is also directed toward godliness, but not the etzem mahus of the animal soul. By tzaddik gomer, tzaddik sheina gomer, it means, and tzaddik gomer, it means that the animal soul itself has been now directed. But by the tzaddik gomer, it's on the highest level, it's been transformed to good. That literally, the nefesh habamis, whatever was considered the nefesh habamis, is now completely directed toward godliness. Etzem mahuseh l'teiv. The Rebbe brings sometimes the difference between David, who said, "Nafshi chol bekirbi," that he says, "My nafshi, my nefesh has a hole within me," meaning he eliminated his yetzer hara. That's what means nafshi chol bekirbi. But then it says by Avram Avinu, "Mitzasi levavei nem lefanecha," levavei, with two bases. That Avram was even deeper because he transformed that vacuum, that hole, into yetzer teiv. So I'm just the two levels in the elimination and ultimately transformation of the animal soul. Ukumoi, and the Rebbe Rashab is continuing to explain this in Avodah. Ukumoi hisapchus hatayva ra. So here would be a practical example. So hatayva ra means an unhealthy, an inappropriate or negative or evil desire or lust. Be'ez zara, that's burning with a strange or alien fire, meaning it's not a fire of holiness, but a fire of the opposite, like sitra achra. Haboyer bekibre, burning inside of him. So he's transforming this negative desire or lust. Be'ez zara, haboyer bekibre, that's burning within him in the strange and foreign fire. Shenepach lies. Then this becomes transformed to become that the very fire that was burning in that direction, that passion, was redirected, and now it's burning a divine fire that is burning with a fiery flame. So now this fire, the passion within his heart, that's a great fire in his soul and in his heart, is directed toward Lashem Echad, the one God, Levade, only, exclusively. That my very being and my very sorry, we touch this. What is sorry? The Levavi. That the very being and heart of the person is expired, is kola, is dissolved in Kalois Hanefesh, like Kaloyan, in godliness.
Allah she'eri.
She'eri. What's the types of she'eri? My flesh?
Yeah.
Or
she'er basar b'derech klar geht es.
the flesh?
Basar.
Yeah. Yeah, we learned this, that. In other words, his whole being is being consumed. Consumed is the right word, with godliness.
The hamshech is tzur levavi v'chelki elikim le'olam.
Right. Yeah. We learned the kol ha'sa'adim she'eri v'levavi. We learned it earlier, much earlier. Okay. So now that's a sapchus. So it's not so what's happened here, it's not just a skafia. Skafia, you've subdued it. Here you've turned it into the passion that was directed in one place in a negative place is now being directed exclusively toward godliness. A person is completely consumed with God. The ein zerak mitzad is gabrus hatev the nefesh alekis. Now, the next thing he has to emphasize, remember that we're talking now that the Gevurah itself has been transformed. And it's not due to a force outside of it. You could say, fine, you've transformed it, but maybe it's still coming from a force of Chesedim. Who says it's coming from the Gevurah itself? You've transformed the Gevurah. Before, in the earlier stage, you could say that you have not transformed. The bitter water remained bitter. It's just been overridden and bottled, b'shishim or be'elef or whatever, completely sublimated, it's completely nullified in the presence of so much sweetness. But here you could say that it's actually transformed the bitter to sweet, but not that the bitter itself became sweet. It's still or let me rephrase that. The bitter became sweet, but due to a force outside of it. So it says, this is not just due to the overpowering goodness of the divine soul, that through the revelation of its faculties, like we learned earlier, that when the mind begins to, the mind of the divine soul begins to contemplate, and it touches and it stimulates the emotions of the nefesh alekis, and is desiring godliness, and that desire is now impacting also the animal soul. He says it's not just that. In a contemplation, a contemplation and a comprehension of God, a godly contemplation and comprehension. With an immersion and a complete immersing yourself in depth with das, with his kashrus, his edurus, ava v'yira, and a stimulation or awakening and arousing of the love and reverence of God. And all this in a form of ribuya eir, with intense and abundant and expansive light and revelation. Shemiz gaber ala nefesh abamis, that overpowers the animal soul. Shemiz batel mepnei nefesh alekis, that gets nullified. It's like in the place where there's darkness. You bring so much light, it completely overwhelms it, overdominates it. But due to the nefesh alekis, show inyan his gabrus hatsura ala chemer. It says ala tsura, but they correct below. That means his gabrus of spirit over matter. The tsura here is ruchnius of the nefesh alekis. Its etherealness, its divine nature, is dominating over the chemer, the crassness of the animal soul. It's not just that. This is all or not. What we just read now in the last few lines, this method does not cause a transformation of the core essence of the animal soul. So he's going back. This is more like we spoke in the Eifana Aleph, the first method. That is the dominance. Well, by the way, we're in the next page. I should have said it around 13, 18 already. This is like the dominance of Chesedim, of the kindness over the severities. The that even when there's that dominance, the Gevuras are still standing in their own. They've not changed fundamentally. They still stand as Gevuras in their position, their location, or their or their personality and their, I would say their identity and their personality remains. It's just that it's overwhelmed or overpowered by the Chesedim. However, here we're talking that it's been a transformation. The true sweetening of the Gevurahs, of the severities, that the Gevurahs themselves, not just due to the overpowering power of the Nefesh Alikis, of the Nefesh Abamis, over the Chesedim, over the Gevurah, they themselves get sweetened. So the Ra has not just been nullified or been dismissed or been subdued or controlled, even completely you can say, but that the Ra nepach l'tev, that the passion that was earlier, the fiery passion in a desire, in a taiva ra, like he said, has been turned into a passion for godliness. So in other words, you could have a person, for example, we're talking about a regular individual, could be in a place where they have a lust or a desire that's not appropriate, very passionate. And then they allow their Mayach Shalt Ala Lev, the divine soul comes and controls and says, it's not good for you to be involved in that. So what do? It subdues the fire. It could even extinguish it to some extent. And you don't act on the taiva, which is essentially what a Beinoni does. That even when a thought, a hirur, ra, he has a negative thought, a desire, a taiva comes into his mind, what he'll do is he will activate his moyach shalat alev, self-control, which is natural also. I'm just paraphrasing Tanya chapter 12, and he'll push it away. He says, Masiach daite legamri, he'll completely distract himself. The dochesh b'shtei yadayim, he says. That person pushes it away, doesn't let that thought control him. That it came to him is Hirhuri Aveda was not in his control. But once he's aware that he has such a desire, such a type, he pushes it away. That's it. That's what's expected of a Beinoni. That's called iskafia. It's a major thing, because if a person can do that their entire life, such self-control, that's quite amazing. However, you can't call it ishapcha. You can't say the Gevurah of the Nefesh Abamis was transformed. You could say it was pushed aside. It was ignored. You distracted yourself. However you use the words, but the bottom line is, like he says here, that this galus of the Nefesh Alikis has been strong enough to push away the Nefesh Abamis. But then, imagine someone is able to take that very passion of that desire that was a negative one and redirects it, like a fire that was burning in a destructive way, and you take that fire and you redirect it and rechannel it to creating a passion for godliness. And you see this. There are people, I've met people myself in my life many times, who were very passionate in things that were very not holy. And when they learned what godliness is about, they learned some Chassidus, they were able to take that passion. They became very passionate Chassidim. People who love God with a deep passion. And when you ask them, they'll say, yeah, that same passion I had is just now going in the other direction. So that's not just eliminating passion. It's redirecting it. It's transforming it. Now, obviously, there are many levels to this. A Beinoni could also redirect passion, just for the record, but it's not a constant. His main challenge, his main work is iskafia, to subdue. That's what's expected of him. Now, later in Tanya, he says that he can get more koiches, the Eibishter can send him more strengths to go even further. At Tzaddik Gomer has come to a place where everything is directed to Kedusha. Now, you could ask the question, is that Tzaddik Gomer born that way? Does he work on it? It's another discussion I don't want to go into right now. But the point being is that total transformation is what he calls the ultimate, the true sweetening of the Gevurahs, when the Gevurah itself is hara atzmei nepach l'tev. And now he goes back to the language from the Zohar that he said, that's cited in Perek Yud and Tanya also, that he began at the beginning of this chapter, where he said the words were, Man de mahapech merira lemiska. So the words are, in Zohar, it's a Zohar. It says, what is the full lashon? It's connected to Rashbi, actually, talking about Lag Baimer. So let me bring the quote straight. Let me just bring a Tanya here. 1 second. So the Zohar says like this. It's talking about how can somebody enter a certain domain. Just want to see the exact lashon. For some reason. I'm reading Perek Yud and Tanya now. Yeah, there we have. So he brings the stories in the beginning of Zohar, the Akdama of Zohar. It's a very fascinating Akdama about Rabbi, a whole thing. But he brings that Rabbi said, and talking about Tzadikim Gemurim. The Isi B'nai Aliyah, I've seen B'nai Aliyah, meaning people of exalted state, a high level. V'hei there are very few. That's why they called B'nai Aliyah, says the Alter Rebbe, because they're Maila, the Mahapchin Hara, they transform the evil, the negative, that's why they're called B'nai. They're not just elevated people. B'nai Aliyah could mean, exalted, superior, elevated people. B'nai means, whenever you say B'nai, like you say a Ben Elam Haba, it means he's a person that is Aliyah says, but the Alter Rebbe touched Mailam Eisei L'Kedusha, and here he brings K'de'isa b'Zoyar b'Agdama, like the Zohar in the introduction to the Zohar. This is the beginning. K'sherotz Rab Chia Lales, where Rab Chia wanted to elevate and go up L'Heichel Rab Shimon ben Yochai. So he wanted to go into the Heichel, into the chamber of Rab Shimon ben Yochai. You can't just go in. It's not just you go. There's no like. It's not like visiting hours where you can just go wherever you want. When you go to a special high level in Gan Eden, in the Heichel of Rab Shimon ben Yochai, Shama Kolo Nafik, he heard a voice come out. V'omar, man chendai chasheichem mahapchen l'nehera v'te'imen mirira l'miska ad lo yesen hacha. Only a person who's transformed darkness to light and bitterness to sweet can come into this place. Or the way the Zohar puts it, until you have transformed darkness to light and bitterness to sweet, lo yesnach, you can't come into this chamber. That's what the Alter Rebbe brings in the middle of chapter in Perek Yud. This is the Zohar. That's what I wanted to refer to. So the expression comes, so this is not a small level. This is talking about a very high level of transformation. So now the Rebbe Rashab returns to that expression. So back on page 1318, he says, and this is the one who transforms bitterness to sweet. So he means here that the meridus of Gevurah, the bitterness of the severities, is fundamentally transformed, not overridden and overpowered and nullified. But it's fundamentally transformed the mesikus, the chesed, to the sweetness of chesed. Okay. So he's now established. One second. So now he's established the second oifen, the second method, the second manner of transforming Gevurah to chesed. This time it's happening not through a force outside, but the Gevurah itself has been transformed. There's much more on this topic, just for the record. There's a lot more, but let's stop here for a moment for questions and then I'll continue.
Simon, I want you to make it clear. You said before that there are people with a negative passion that turn it completely, but they are Beinani. I think
first of all, one second, let me make it clear. He doesn't say the word Beinani here. I use the expression, as a matter of fact, a Beinani is not someone that transforms. That a Beinani is more iskafia. So just for the record, it's not what I said. Okay, I said a Beinani is iskafia. At the bottom of the page, I just translated what he said. Look back in the bottom of Aleph Shin Yud Zayin. The transformation of a passion and a fire that's in the negative is transformed into the positive. That's what I was referring to.
Okay. I still understand that these people, which is really powerful, but it's shaloi be'arich to a tzaddik, because even though that in that moment they have this passion, fiery passion to the Eibishter, but they are capable within a second to lose this.
He's not discussing that here. That's not the discussion. Remember, this is Ayin Beis. This is a discussion in Tanya. This is another discussion, what category. I'm just referring to titles he's been using here. The Mahapach Meril Miska he uses in Perek Yud on a Tzadik Gomer. That's all I'm referring to.
Okay, well, it makes sense what I said, right? That they are not in the category.
Every person is a different story. You could have people who are not Beinani, even a Rosh Viraloi can take passion in the negative and direct it to passion of Kedusha. It's not unheard of. Everybody can do it. Here, the question is it permanent? Is it part of his personality? Here, he's not coming to define individuals so much as coming to define states of being. He wants to explain the difference between a Gevurah that is overwhelmed or overridden by Chesed, which is Eifena Aleph, that the Chesed is the one, the sweet waters are more than the bitter, or that the bitter itself gets transformed. So he's giving examples. One example, he says, so the categorization of individuals is not really the focus here, even though we are getting some clarity on what a Tzadik Gomer is, what a Tzadik Sheina Gomer is, also what a Beinani is. So it's not so much the categorization here, it's more the Beinani generally is iskafia.
Yeah. It's already,
like we said, he has a full Muhammad. The Tzaddik, he said, is bittul be'etzem mahus nefesh habamis. In a Tzaddik itself, there's two levels, Tzadik Gomer, Tzadik Sheina Gomer. That's how I would keep to it.
Yeah, and these people that you bought, it's a different quality, even though that this is amazing, but it's not the quality of a tzaddik. That's what I'm trying to find.
I don't know if he's talking about those people here. He didn't categorize such people. He said, you can interpret it as you wish. He says at the bottom of page Shin Yud Aleph Shin Yud Zayin, he's not categorizing a person. He's just giving an example of his sapcha.
Okay. A second thing, Rabbi Simon, you remember once he spoke about.
One second. Despising evil and transformation of evil to good from the Zohar that he's quoting from Tanya, that's the level of Tzadik Gomer. Now, I'm sure there are levels in that too. He's still going to talk about it, but go ahead, yeah.
You spoke about the letter that the Rabbi gave out and he sent to the Zohar from Rabbi Shiur, that it was in the Heichal from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and they said, what is he doing here? You remember what I'm talking about? You remember?
Yeah, of course. That's in the same Zohar, the Akdama.
So I think that this is the same Zohar. Rabbi Shiur wasn't able.
It is that Zohar. That's the Zohar that the Rebbe wrote in Tov Shelamet Ches to Rabbi Avram Hecht when he asked him about what happened on Shmini Atzeres when the Rebbe had the heart attack. So the Rebbe wrote to the Rebbe, L'cheda, what do we need is Tagmas Nefesh when the Rebbe is clearly coming out of it, Baruch Hashem, and healing. So the Rebbe wrote to look at Zohar B'Akdama.
As this Hanukkah, when the Rebbe made the Surah Sedor, the Rebbe sent them to this Zohar.
He wrote a note. I've brained about this, a long discussion. Yeah. It's the same Zohar, yeah. I mean, it's a Zohar of 3 pages, I think. It's pretty long Zohar there. But this is part of it. And Rashbi then told the Eibishter said, a neshama like this belongs here. And he said, no, to send him back down. Because he was so immersed with Mashiach. It's a whole Zohar. But there's no question that part of it where he enters into the Heichel Rashbi, and it says that only someone who's transformed darkness to light. Yeah. It's the same Zohar, yeah.
I don't understand it. So how does that relate to what the Rebbe said to him? I mean, is there a relation or just happens to be there?
It's definitely nothing to do with Ayin Beis. You have to know, you remember when I go back to what I spoke a whole Fabringan, a whole talk on this topic, where Rabbi Shiur was sent back to earth to do his shlichus. There's a talk, I think also Rabbi Yankel Hecht once talked about it in 770, if I recall. I don't want to, it's really digressing. It's not really negay here. Could talk about it another time. Okay. Any other questions? So
I posted a link to the Zohar in the chat box.
Okay. So continuing on, we're on now we're on the seventh, 9th line on page 1318. Aleph Shin Yoches. Now he says, "V'hinei," and now l'cheira, seemingly harikola teira nivna yesed zeh. The entire Torah is built on this foundation. Shulahamti kadin, the kava small, b'chesed, the kava yamin. Interesting statement. Seemingly, the entire Torah is built on this foundation to sweeten the judgment from the left. Kava smell means the left side. Gevurah, to sweeten it, the Chesed, the kindness of kava yamin, of the right side. Shuzeh mashikosu b'zeya parsha keirach. Daf kuv ayin vov amar aleph. This is what it says in Zeir in the parsha keirach. 176a, Klola Daraisa, the Klola Daraisa, the klal, a rule, a foundation, a fundamental principle of Torah, Lichlolo Smola B'Yamina. That Smola, the left, which is Gevurah, should be encompassed and absorbed B'Yamina in the right side. This is one of the reasons that by Chassidim we put on the right. The jacket goes right over left. They should always have his gabrus of chesed over gvurah, right over left. So this is what the Zohar says, and it's called klola daraisa. The Rebbe Rashab uses words here that the kol hatera nivnal yesed zeh. Questions, why say l'cheira? Let's see where he's going with this. Ukumesh kosav, like it says, Miyamine eish das lamei. So it says in Hazinu, Miyamine. Miyamine eish das lamei. So he's talking about eish and yamin. Yamine mean from the right side, eish das lamei, which is the fire.
Pasha's bracha. I think it's Pasha's bracha.
Yeah, you're right. It's a bracha?
I think
okay.
So.
What is the pasuk saying? The bechinis yamin gave it ala smoil. Miyamine, that is the right side, which again is chesed, dominates over the left. Yamin Hashem remema. Yamin Hashem eisa chayil. The niggin we always sing with Samach Tzedek. So it says clearly, Yamin Hashem, the right side of Hashem, the right of Hashem, remema will dominate, will exalt, will be exalted. Yamin Hashem, Eiseh Chayil. The right side, Eiseh Chayil, leads in battle or wins the victory. So all these are proofs that he's bringing that l'cheira, the yesod of Torah, of Kol HaTorah, is the dominance of Chesed over Gevurah. V'zel kol inyan hatikun, and this is the whole role of Tikkun. When we say Elam HaTikkun, the world of Tikkun, and the whole Avodah of Tikkun, of repair, what is it? B'tagbedes achsodim d'shema al b'chinas hagvurah is d'shem ban. So one of the ways it's explained is that Tikkun, Toyu is the world of Shem Gevurah where Shem ban dominates, and Tikkun comes the dominance or the overpowering of chsodim that come from Shem Ma. Ma is gematria Odom, bittul. Ma is bittul. Ban is gematria Behema, which is more like a very powerful, intense energy, but needs to be controlled and tamed. So it's his gabrus, tagbedes achsodim of Shem Ma over the gevurahs of Shem Ban. Now let's remember that Ban is also Shem Yudke Vovke, b'milei Hayin, which is what makes it 52. Shema is 45. But so both of them are coming from Shem Havaya, but it's the Havaya that relates to Tikkun or the Havaya that relates to the Ban of Gevurah of Ban. So again, all this, the Rebbe Rashab is explaining that this concept that we're discussing, sweetening of the sweetness dominating over of Chesed over Gevurah, is the Yisod, a fundamental principle and foundation in Torah. So it appears that this is a question, because based on this, it Since Kol HaTeira is the dominance of Chesed over Gevurah, so why are we talking that Gevurah itself gets transformed? That's not the main thing. The main thing we find is Lichlala Smali B'Yamina, that the Yamin should be Gevurah. So yes, it's a beautiful concept to transform the Gevurah itself, but the real point in Torah is always that Yamin should dominate. That Chesed should be more powerful than Gevurah. That kindness should be more powerful than severity. So, what is this emphasis on the second Eifin that Gevurah itself gets sweetened? So he's going to explain that too happens through the dominance of Chesed over Gevurah. It's just a deeper level of dominance. It's not just a dominating factor like an outside force that nullifies and overrides the Gevurah, but one that actually impacts the Gevurah. That's what he's going to say now. So the plot thickens. So he says, Acha Inyan. That's why he said L'cheira. Not L'cheira is it the Yesod in Torah. It's obviously a foundation in Torah. L'cheira is like a question. You're just telling me now about the transformation. L'cheira, the whole foundation of Torah, is not about the transformation. It's about the dominance. Lahamtika din b'chesed, which is far more sounds like the first Eifin, that the din should be sweetened with chesed, that the bitter waters should be sweetened with the sweet waters. So he's now going to explain and answer that. Acha inyan, the inyan, however, the inyan of this is like this. The b'chinas hamtok zu, this second level of sweetening that we're discussing here, shagvuras atzman, that the Gevuras themselves, mishapchin l'chsadim, are transformed to kindness, to love. Zeu gam ken alidei b'chinas hachesed. That also comes through chesed. Even though we said that the Gevurah itself is transformed, that's just the depth of how much the chesed affects it, but it originates and it's stimulated and generated through chesed. So if that's the case, so what's the difference between Ayin Beis and Ayin Aleph? If they're both coming from Chesed, isn't that the same thing as the first way? So he says no. The only thing is the second manner is not like the first one, which is Ribuy Amiyut, which is quantity. More sweet water over less bitter. More Chesed over less Gevurah. Where V'hainu rak b'chinas bitl ha'Gevuras. That's only the bitl of Gevurah. That is the nullification of Gevurah. That becomes nullified due to the abundance of the amount of chesed there is. That's not in a form that it got transformed fundamentally. So it's coming through chesed, but there in the first it's ribuy amiyut. It's a nullification process. Ubchinas hamtaka hanal, however, but the second level of hamtaka, which also comes through chesed, hu shagvura nefcha lechesed. Here, it's gone deeper. That the Gevurah has actually been transformed to chesed. Lo rak shem is batul. Not only that it's been nullified, it's been transformed. V'hu gam ken alidei chesed. And this also is caused through chesed. Rak she'ein ze b'ribui chesed. However, in this case, it's not due to the abundance of chesed. Ki'im b'mailas madregas ha'chesed. This is more due to the quality of the level of chesed, u'kamosh yisboyer, as shall be explained, which means he didn't explain it yet. So in other words, it's both of them are coming through chesed. So then the yesod of Torah, which is that Gevurah should be sublimated and chesed should dominate over Gevurah, is true in both methods. And yet there's a fundamental difference of what happens. The first one is the kamus, is the very quantity and volume of chesed that overrides and nullifies the Gevurah. And the second is the quality of chesed, not just its quantity, the quality that does something that causes the Gevurah itself to be transformed. And that will be explained later. But, one second. But he's going to say something about it in the parentheses. So let's read the parentheses. He says, V'hu. I'm sorry, V'klolis, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. V'klolis in hamtoka azayis, And in general, this level of sweetening, he's talking now the second level. Oh, one second, not necessarily. This general idea of the sweetening that comes through chsadim, through kindness, hu achshav. That's the case today. Shachsadim l'mayla ma'gvura. Okay, he's making an important qualification here, which we're going to learn about a lot later. That in general, today, meaning zman hazeh, not before la'asad lavi, not in the future. So that chsadim today is higher than gvura, supposed to be dominant over gvura. And the reason is very basic, because gvura, when it dominates, can be very negative. So chesed is supposed to dominate over gvura. So l'mayla ma'gvura. For who? Here comes a parenthesis within the parentheses, and they below in the footnote they say this parenthesis concludes in the line below it. I'll tell you where in a moment. Let me see if I agree. For who? What does that mean? The shem ma l'mayla m'shem ban, like we said before. Shem ma is higher than shem ban. U'mevaris hashem ban.
Where is the end of this, of the first?
I just said that I will mention in a few moments. Let's read and we'll see. If you want, look in the footnote below. They already tell you if you want. But I'm going to read it and I'll tell you what I think. So this shema is higher than shem ban, u'mevaris hashem ban, and it has the power to refine, to separate, to clarify, to elevate shem ban. Shezeh inyan ha'amtoket. This is the hamtoket. That what? The chesed is refining and elevating and sweetening ban. V'hu inyan v'hu yimshal bach. This is the hu yimshal bach that says after chet tzadas. So one of the punishments or the effects on Chaved says he, the man, the zochar, chesed will dominate over gvura, over the nekeva. But this is not necessarily the most natural and best situation. Is because today in a world that's not pure, you need chesed to be stronger than gvura. Like the Kehanim are higher than the Levim. And here, by the way, is connected to the pasuk we learned in the previous page when he said, "Vel ishach chukoscha," is connected to that. That Malchus is receiving, the gvuras of Malchus are sweetened by the chsadim of Zah. Okay. So the footnote below says that the parentheses, within the parentheses, ends here. It makes sense.
All right.
You could say it ends after the word Hashem ban, but I would agree because Shema is Zochar and Shem ban is Nekeva often. So it could be that it goes right here. I would agree. Hypothetically, you could say it ends after the word Hashem ban, but I don't think so. But here comes the second part of this parenthesis. That's today. In the future, Gevurah will rise, and there'll be a quality of Gevurah that will be more powerful than Chsadim. And then the sweetness of the Gevurahs will be on their own, similar to what we learned that the Kalim will be rooted in the Helam Ha'atzmi. But that's only L'asad Lavi. That's after the Chsadim have refined the Gevurah, then the Gevurahs will rise in a place that's even higher than Chsadim, but that's L'asad. And there's a taste of this, a semblance of this also now, in our time, in the transformation of evil and the negative through tshuva, as shall be explained. Okay. So, not to confuse matters, it's very clear that there's a lot more coming. He says twice, Kamoshi is Bayer, but he gave us a little taste of what's coming. So let me just sum it up so it'll be a little clearer, and then I'll stop with any questions. So first thing he established is the second ofen of transformation of Gevurah from the Gevurah itself. But he qualified and said, but it is a sudden Torah that Chesed dominates over Gevurah. So what do you mean Gevurah itself? So he says, because that too, even when the Gevurah itself is transformed, is also coming through Chesed. So at the end of the day, both Chesed sweetens Gevurah in two ways. One is it overpowers it through its abundance of like the sweet waters that are far more than the bitter. So it sweetens the bitter, but not be'etzem uhusei. The bitter has not become sweet. It's just been nullified and dominated, controlled by the sweet, by the chsadim. The second is that the chesed, due to its quality, and he said he'll explain what that means later, causes the gevurah itself to be transformed, that it itself, the bitter itself, becomes sweet, not just nullified. But then in the parentheses, he says, all this is today. Today, meaning Bizman Hazeh, or Zman HaGolus, till Mashiach come, till Asid Lave, that's the case. And both approaches. Chesed is the driving force that does the birur. The question is it a quantity that nullifies the gevurah, or is it its quality that transforms it? But then there's going to be a fundamental shift. La'asid Lave is going to be a situation where the gevurah will be at a point where it goes and rises and has a quality that's even higher than chesed. And that's what ultimately we'll learn is going to be a third level of transformation of gevurah, that the gevurah itself transforms itself. It's not through the chesed. So you'll have basically three effects of sweetening gevurah. 1, 2 through chesed, 1 nullifies, 1 transforms it. And then a third, which is la'asid lave, and a taste of it today through tshuva, that the gevurah itself transforms itself, not through chesed, which we're going to learn about later, more about ichus. But right now he said, Kamoshi is boy, it shall be explained. So it's clearly only briefly stated here. But the Rebbe Rashab didn't want to leave us with any wrong impressions. So he states all the facts. And then we're going to go and learn about this much more detail as we go on the next paragraph and on. Just for the record, this third eifin is going to become on page 1322. We're now 1318. Okay, so we have plenty place to go, with plenty more to travel. I'll stop here. Any questions, please?
So that means that even today there is a concept that the gevurah is nepach.
He says me'ein zeh through tshuva. Yeah.
No. Before that the gevurah is nepach, not only misbattle, even today.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You just said a third ofen. I thought there were just 2. One's where the chassidim overpowers the gevurahs and sweetens it that way, and the other is that the gevurahs are sweetened essentially from within, completely transformed.
But it's also through chesed. The chesed is the driving force that does that, as he explained. But and the third way will be gevurah itself without chesed. Which we shall learn. Yeah.
So that's the reason it says that. Yeah, the Kohanim Halavim, and
exactly.
Yeah.
The Levim will be Kohanim. The Levim, which is Gevurah today, will rise. This has also been the mistake that Yitzchak, when he wanted to give the bracha to Esav, because he saw la'asid lave, that the Gevurah of Esav will be higher than the Chesed of Yaakov, because Esav is Ban and Yaakov is Ma, and the same thing Korach. When Korach mutineered and challenged Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he was a Levi, and he challenged the kahuna of Aaron. The explanation is because he saw la'asid lave, there'll be the mile of Gevurah over Chesed, Levi over Kohen. The mistake was that we're not ready yet for that. That's then. Today we still need Chesed to train and to refine Gevurah before Gevurah is ready to rise. It's like saying the neshama and the guf, as we shall learn. The neshama today has to dominate over the body, but la'asid lave, once the body has been refined, that will reveal the shadish of the yesha amiti, that is the root of the body, which is higher than the root of the soul. But that cannot come until there's first the dominance of spirit over matter. First, Ruchnius has to be more powerful in Gashmius, and then it reveals in Gashmius something that Ruchnius doesn't have. This is a fundamental thing you may have learned in many places in Chassidus. That's what he's going to ultimately.
Yeah, and
But you
you can
can't get
extend
to
it to
one
women
without
over
the other.
men too. You can extend it to the feminine aspects of the universe. And muscle lovey. It's the whole thing. Oh, it's unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in a way the Meraglim made the mistake. The scouts, they thought spiritual is superior to material, and they wanted to stay in a spiritual environment in the wilderness. And they say it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Materialism will not allow us to be spiritual, or will compromise our spirituality. And they were wrong, because God wants us to come into this world, to go into Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Nesheves, and struggle. And yes, there's challenges, but he wants us to transform it. Kairach, when he heard that, he said, oh, if that's the case, we belong on earth. What do we need ruchnius for? What do we need lamet tisnas, madur tisnasu? What do we need leaders for? Kol ha'edah. Everybody is holy. The body is also holy. Gevurah is also powerful, even more powerful maybe than Chesed. The problem is you need a direction. Someone can't just come and say Gashmis is more powerful if you don't first learn Torah and have bittul and do mitzvahs and be committed. Because if you just give Gashmis, this is what the big mistake of the Shabtai Tzviniks and the Frankisten was. They learned Kabbalah. Kabbalah said the highest sparks are in the lowest things. So they went and made orgies and all kinds of horrible things. We're elevating the highest sparks. No, it doesn't work that way. It works the other way. First, you have to bring in Kedusha, and certain things are off limits. It's when you let Chesed dominate over Gevurah and you let the Neshama dominate over the Guf, then you can reveal the power of the Guf. But there was a big risk, because you start saying, oh, Gashmis has more power, so why not just do everything, even things that are prohibited? Ultimately, if you transform it through tshuva, you can reach the highest levels, even higher than a tzaddik. Doesn't work that way. It works first, you have to have bittul, because at the end of the day, Gashmis is a very powerful force, and you can justify anything by saying, I've met people like that. They say, no, the more you indulge in this world, the more godliness you bring. Yeah, first you need bittul before you need iskafia before ishapcha. Let's put it that way.
That's why Eliyahu Hanavi comes in to announce the Geula, because he transformed his group the most. We learned this, and it's an amazing thing. It all ties in, unbelievable.
Yeah, great stuff here. So, any other questions? If not,
That gives us an explanation in the cave of the Sefer Gevurah.
This is the explanation. Exactly, this is it. Yeah. And the Rebbe Rashab brought this already earlier when he spoke about Keli and Oir, about Neshama and Guf. Neshama is zunis min haguf, that the soul will actually be sustained through the body. You can imagine today the body gets its energy from a soul. The soul will get its energy from the body. That's ultimate transformation. But that's for us as loving. And we are at that threshold, obviously. So this is setting the stage. So it's going to get it's very powerful and very fundamental, of course.
And this is the Einoid about La'asid Lavoi, or even
this is going to be Einoid ultimately. Yeah. When the Gvuras, the Kalim, the Gashmias becomes Malchus is Eila Eshes Chayla Teres Baila, the cave into Sev of Govar, where Malchus is going to be Mashpia into Zah and so on, and to Bina,